station.
Support for First Coast Connect is provided in part by Baptist Health and North Florida TPO.
Good morning. I'm Ann Schindler, and this is First Coast Connect. Today, family members and a local historian remember some of the 33 men and women who died when the El Faro cargo ship sank. We mark a decade since the disaster. Later in the program, getting answers to your questions about breast health, we tell you about an upcoming free local forum. But first, a weekend memorial in Maine was the first of several public and private remembrances of the sinking of the El Faro on October 1st, 2015. Here to help us remember what happened and the lives lost, we are joined by Rochelle Hamm, widow of El Faro helmsman Frank Hamm and founder of the Hamm Alert Foundation. Good morning, Rochelle.
Good morning.
We're also joined by Alan Bliss, CEO of the Jacksonville History Center. Good morning, Alan.
Good morning, Ann.
And on the line, we are joined by Glen Jackson, brother of El Faro helmsman Jack E. Jackson. Good morning, Glen. Thanks for joining us.
Good morning.
Rochelle, I want to start with you. Will you just begin by telling us a little bit about what this anniversary means to you and tell us a little bit about Frank?
This anniversary is huge because the 10 years have just went by so fast, and it's just hard to believe that it is 10 years. But I'm glad that our story is being kept alive and that Frank is everywhere, in Maine and, Poland, where the different memorials are. So I'm excited about that. My husband was a funny guy. He was tall. He was lovable. He was like a big teddy bear, and I miss him so much. He loved his job. He loved his career. That was all he talked about, was being on the water.
Mm-hmm.
That was all he talked about.
Frank was 49 when he died. The two of you had been married almost 20 years. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
And 5 children?
Yes.
Yeah. They say sometimes with sailors that there's the two great moments of any voyage are, starting off to sea and then coming home. What was it that Frank liked about his job? What did he enjoy about being on the water?
He loved the things that he saw. He loved the things with places that he's been and things like that. He would tell us about the wildlife that he would see, and the different countries and places that he went traveling around the world.
He had done longer stints on cargo vessels before he came and took the job that he had when he was riding on the El Faro, because that was a ship that had a very regular schedule and it
Right.
returned him home regularly.
And that was why he took that voyage.
Yeah.
Because he was coming home every week.
That was basically, was it like a 6 or 7 day turnaround?
Yes. It was like, they left on Thursday, they came back on Monday, so we got to see him every week.
Which is unusual for
Yes.
people in that line of work.
Yes.
Yeah. And so Frank is known to people both through the stories that you've told about him and also through a rather remarkable discovery in the months after the ship disappeared. And that was his helmet.
Yes.
Which was discovered in Ormond Beach.
Yes.
Yeah. That has been a significant discovery because it really was almost virtually the only intact piece of anything from that ship, and it was your husband's.
Right.
Where does that live now?
In my home. I have it inside of a case, and I have it in my home in my office.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that has been an important connection for you.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes.
Glenn, I want to bring you into the conversation. Your brother, Jack E. Jackson, was also a helmsman on the El Faro. Your family was from New Orleans originally, but he had a very active artistic life outside of his work on the ship. Can you just tell us a little bit about Jack?
Oh, he was, he was my big brother. He developed a love of drawing at a young age, and we were a military family, so we moved around a great deal prior to my father being sent to Vietnam, and that's how we ended up in New Orleans due to extended family. So while we were here in New Orleans in the beginning, my brother started taking drawing classes at this local museum, and then that just expanded and grew and grew and grew, and he did sculpture. In fact, his house in Jacksonville, prior to his death, he had erected about an 8-foot tall statue of the Buddha out of concrete that he would work on his time off. He'd come in, sleep for a couple of days, try to get rested, then he'd go back to work on it. And I still have some pictures of it. And just anything acrylics, sculpture, woodworking. It was just gardening. It was just all part of his multifaceted personality.
And he was also a big reader, was he not?
Oh, voracious. We would, when he'd come in, he'd sleep for a couple of days, and we'd talk about, any new books I had found and discovered to encourage, recommend to him, and vice versa. He'd tell me about stuff he had come across, and like, okay, keep a notebook about, trying to keep up with all the many great things to read.
You and your sister Jill and Jack were all, very close as siblings. And as I recall from your story, and also previously talking to your sister in years past, you had heard from your brother about concerns that he had, in particular about safety on this ship. Can you talk a little bit about what he had communicated to you and Jill prior to that voyage?
I'm constrained in what I can say, but I can tell you that on September 1st, prior to the sinking, he called me, and we spoke for almost an hour, and he was seriously contemplating breaking his contract, which he had never done in his almost 40 years of going to sea, and but he decided not to, and unfortunately, the results of that choice. But I am constrained in what I can say otherwise.
Yeah, and we should say, obviously, after this tragedy, there were settlements with family members, survivors of those who were lost, and those settlements include a non-disparagement agreement against Tote, which owned the El Faro, and so those constraints are real. It seemed, though, in addition to safety concerns, that perhaps he had sort of some premonitions that he was worried, not necessarily about safety, but just kind of in a personal or a spiritual sense. Is that accurate, or do I have that incorrect?
I was just taken aback when he called me on September 1st. That again, he had never expressed any reservations about doing his job, and again, 40 years he went to Antarctica, he went everywhere except for Russia in his seafaring career, and that was the only time I ever heard him express to me that he was thinking about breaking his contract. I'll have to leave it at that.
Okay. Alan Bliss, you are planning a presentation at the Jax History Center to talk about the El Faro and discuss where it stands in the minds and the memories of this community, a port city. Can you remind us? I mean, people on shore knew the storm was there, Hurricane Joaquin. What did we know about conditions at that time when the ship was out there?
Well, Ann, thanks for taking an interest in this story. And it matters not just because it's a human tragedy and a maritime tragedy, which, that's a story that belongs to the world, but it's a important Jacksonville story. 14 of the 28 regular duty crew members aboard were Jacksonville people and widely known across this community. The ship was very familiar around here. When it sailed on the 29th of September, everybody was aware that Hurricane Joaquin was out there in the Atlantic. I'm not sure it was at full hurricane strength at the time that the ship departed. But there was obviously no anticipation that it was going to be a serious threat to shipping on that trip. So circumstances developed in the course of the voyage, and of course we all know how that wound up.
And so, for those who maybe aren't as familiar with the narrative and the timetable, just remind us a little bit about some of the. I mean, we know that it set sail.
Connecting me through to a QI.
Oh, I'm sorry, that's a little sound we're going to hear from in a minute. But in September 29th, the ship left Jacksonville. It sank on October 1st. There was a lot going on in the world, not just a storm at sea. There was a mass shooting that had happened that very same day that the ship lost contact. And so there was, in the news cycle, it seemed like it took a day or two for people to really understand that the loss of contact with this ship was, in fact, the loss of the ship. And it wasn't declared missing until October 2nd. So there was a long period there where it seemed like there was just confusion, uncertainty about what had happened. Rochelle, is that how you remember that period? I mean, do you recall how you first learned of the loss of contact?
Yes, I was working at the time, and the company called me and told me that Frank's ship was missing, and it was just unbelievable. I remember going to my supervisor and just losing it, and it was just like the rest of that day we were getting phone calls of a number that we could call to check up on the status. They were looking for the crew and things like that.
And what was your communication with Frank when he was heading out on this voyage in terms of Hurricane Joaquin, whether that was on anybody's radar, whether it was a concern of his?
Well, he really wasn't, concerned or worried or anything like that. We would communicate by text. I mean, emails is how we would, stay in contact with each other once they left out of range. But he never said anything like that at all.
Yeah. And it does seem that when this ship left port, that the captain was also not too worried, Alan, about encountering this storm. At the time, the forecast had a little bit of a different trajectory. The storm was predicted to move back north, and instead it moved southwest, which was directly into the path that the ship was going between Jacksonville and Puerto Rico.
Yeah, the storm did things that had not been predicted early on, and so it took a surprising track. It strengthened more seriously and more quickly than had been forecast. Uh, the Hurricane Center did a really good job in keeping up with it and in adjusting its forecast. But also, the ship itself was a veteran of that trip. It had made passages, countless passages back and forth on that trip. There was nobody had any reason to expect that it wasn't up to the voyage. The ship had been launched in 1974, so it had decades of experience at sea. The skipper, the crew, all experienced mariners. Nobody had any reason to think that they weren't up to the passage, up to the voyage.
We do know as this ship encountered this storm that a number of things went awry, and the investigation into what sank this ship was extensive. Um, Glen Jackson, I know that you and your family attended, you and your sister attended this series of hearings, weeks and weeks of hearings, daily, with a picture of your brother, as did many family members, as did Miss Hamm. What did you what were you learning during the early weeks of those hearings, of that investigation? And can you tell us a little bit about how the knowledge evolved over the course of those essentially three separate chunks of an investigation, each about 3 weeks long?
Well, not being a seafarer myself, I tried to, but my brother severely discouraged me from trying to pursue that line of work. There are so many things that we, as shoreside people, don't understand about the operations, the day-to-day duties that go into it. So it was just so revealing about, again, and also you can hear it on the some of the tapes. It's just the daily operation of getting a ship from point A to point B, and as the Coast Guard's incredible efforts came forward, all these decisions that were made years prior and up to the misbroadcast weather report that they received that was actually a repeat of one from I believe 8 hours earlier. It just revealed a cascade of events that put everything in motion that led to that tragic finality.
And Glenn, it is an incredibly complex system, as you say, and so many factors played a role, including, the ship structurally perhaps had been altered. That may have made an impact, but the weather certainly, the pressures of commercial shipping, perhaps, um, driving a need to stay on course and make it to, the next port on time. But one of the things that seemed key, certainly to investigators, for the NTSB, the National Transportation Safety Board, who were part of this investigation, was the fact that the lifeboats on this vessel were not enclosed. There is sort of a different version of a lifeboat that encapsulates people who are inside. The ones on the El Faro were not. They were open lifeboats. They had to be um, dropped down the side on chains, or on chains to reach the water, and all of that would have been incredibly difficult given the circumstances when this ship was in the middle of a Category 4 storm. with an incredible list. The ship had begun taking on water and was essentially like tilted into the water. So, what was it that about the lifeboats in particular that caught your attention during those hearings?
Well, it's just the regulatory framework. Despite the various laws that were passed that the Coast Guard had enacted and the NTSB had enacted to improve safety at sea, there were ships that were grandfathered in, and they were completely legal in compliance at the time of the legislation, and the fact that they were not upgraded because of the grandfathering written into the legislation. That's just hard to accept, but that's the facts, and it was the law. It was the current safety standard at the time.
Yeah, and we should say that after the sinking, while there were settlements with family members, nobody was held criminally liable for this incident. If you're just joining us, we are talking with family members and a local historian about the sinking of the El Faro, which occurred 10 years ago this week, this Wednesday, in fact. You can join the conversation if you've got comments or questions. You can call us at 904-549-2937, or you can email firstcoastconnect at wjct.org. You can also reach out on social media. Rochelle, Glenn alludes to some of the regulations that govern maritime shipping, and they are complex and very extensive and daunting. But you took that on as a personal challenge after the ship was lost. In honor of your husband, you really pursued trying to bring about some regulatory change. Will you tell us a little bit about what motivated you to do that? What initially you focused on?
Yes. What drove me to do that was I didn't want nobody else to go through what we went through, and I just felt like, uh, they needed a voice, because when things happen, they get in trouble for reporting things, and I just feel like when you're working, you should feel comfortable, and you should be in a safe environment. So I took on that task, not knowing what I was doing, not knowing what the outcome was going to be. I took that task on out of anger of what happened, honestly, and then God worked it out where it came to pass.
How did you choose? I mean, you mentioned like a reporting line, and that is something that the foundation, championed, the idea that people can safely report if they have safety concerns, because
Right.
we know that there were people on board that ship that had very serious safety concerns. Um, and including some inspectors had safety concerns about this ship and its condition. Some of those things may have contributed to the incident, including, hatches that maybe were not supposed to be open or had broken open, allowing water into the hold. The fact that perhaps the cargo wasn't lashed as it should have been for a storm. But there were other things that you also specifically pushed for, having to do with personal safety beacons that individual sailors could carry, which would
Right.
basically help identify them if they're on a lifeboat or if they're on a ship. Um, so, how did you select the other priorities that you were going to focus on?
What I did was every night at Denny's, I went late and I went through the transcripts, and I read them, and I'm looking at um and listening for what the needs were. When I sat at the hearings and listened, and I was just totally in awe of what they went through while they were working. And so I just started creating my list from there. You know what I mean? Because at the end of the day, I just feel like everybody need to have what they need as far as safety. You know what I
Hmm.
mean? It shouldn't be no question or anything, like that. And it just boils down to they didn't have what they needed.
I want to talk about the transcripts with you a little bit because, after this ship was sunk, I mean, one of the things the ship didn't have was a beacon
Right.
that was had a sufficient battery to allow rescue crews to find it quickly.
Right.
And so while there was this emergency beacon that did send out an alert, it didn't last long enough for people to be able to locate the ship quickly. And so there had to be an enormous search just to find the vessel after it sank October 1st. It was finally found October 31st, but it was another at least another year before the voice data recorder, essentially the black box aboard the ship that recorded what's happening on the bridge, was recovered. And that really changed things about what we knew about what happened, because the initial hearings, those first 6 weeks or so, there was no transcript of that voice data recorder. How did that change things for you personally? Because your husband is on that voice data recorder as a helmsman.
Right. What changed things for me was knowing that he was, at the bridge of the ship when it went down. And then I'm learning of how the black box works. You hear the recordings, you hear the talking and things like that. But then when you don't have anything at all, that means that the ship is totally submerged. And my heart just went out to my baby, and the crew. You know what I mean? It was just like everything just went silent.
They did not release the audio. They released a transcribed version of what the investigators themselves heard and
Right.
listened to. How did you feel about that? Was that something you were glad that did not go kind of out to the public? Was it something that you wish you were able to listen to?
I wish that we did get an opportunity to listen to it, but from what they were saying, it was they needed to use special like technology and stuff like that in order to listen to it because it was so damaged by being underwater for so long. But I am glad that they were able to print it out, and I mean I read that thing from front to back.
So while there is not audio of that, um, the exchanges between the captain and the various people who were steering the ship in those final hours, there is audio of the captain's final call to shore. He had reached out to speak to what's known as a QI or a qualified individual. And we have some of that audio where you can hear the captain's impatience as he's being essentially put on hold and delays. This clip is about 1 minute long. Let's take a listen to it.
Are you connecting me through to a QI?
That's what I'm getting right now is seeing who is on call, and I'm going to get you right to them. Give me 1 second, sir. I'm going to put you on a quick hold. So 1 moment, please. Okay, sir. I just need your name, please.
Yes, ma'am. My name is Michael Davidson. Michael C. Davidson.
Your rank.
Ship's master.
Okay, thank you. Ship's name.
El Faro.
Spell that. E-L.
Oh, man. The clock is ticking. Can I please speak with a QI? El Faro. Echo Lima. Space. Foxtrot. Alpha. Romeo. Oscar. El Faro.
So that is just a little of the audio of that call. The call continues even after that. About 3 minutes in, he's asked again, really briefly, what is the problem that you're having? And he can be heard muttering, oh my God. 17 minutes after that, Alan, the ship went down. So really in the last desperate moments, he's encountering this sort of protocol, I guess you'd say. It's really hard to listen to.
It is. And it's worth considering, too, though, as you observed, Ann, it was close to a year before the voice data recorder was recovered from 15,000 feet underwater amidst the debris, the wreckage of the ship. So until that voice data recorder was recovered and until the actual recordings that it contained were transcribed with great difficulty and great effort, really about all anybody had to go on as far as the fate of the ship was concerned was that very brief snippet of a phone call recorded that Captain Davidson had tried to get through. So people were speculating and left to speculate for the better part of a year as to what had happened. One of the controversies that lingered during the investigation, after the investigation, during the hearings, was whether it had really been worth it to expend that tremendous effort over nearly 10 months and several millions of dollars to recover the voice data recorder. It was an extraordinary effort. And critics of that effort said, what more do we really need to know? The ship sailed into a hurricane. It shouldn't have been there. We know that the captain was aware that it was in trouble. He was trying to reach out, let the ship's owners know what was going on. There was some question, some challenge about whether there was enough of a cost benefit to those millions of dollars expended. I happen to fall on the side of that question that advocates that there is no limit to how much information we ought to have about a casualty like that. And the recording in addition to really helping give a little bit of closure to the loved ones, the family members of the people involved, it also helps us kind of break down the sequence of events, the chain of events that actually led up to the casualty. Transportation incidents like this are never the result of one single factor. It's a chain of factors that just line up.
And to your point, when this was recovered, they had to go down 15,000 feet where the ship was on the bottom of the ocean. It was, well below where humans could withstand that kind of pressure. So they had to send a automated recovery machine to pull it back up. And I believe that Senator Bill Nelson really kind of led that effort, pushing for the recovery of that um, when he was a senator. What, though, specifically do you think we learned from that 26 hours of bridge audio that teaches us more about why it went down, taught us something necessary?
One of the big takeaways for me is that in the case of the El Faro, we know now that the captain was relying on weather information that was provided by a private vendor, a service that provided processed weather data information from a variety of sources, and they customized that for customers such as the ship owners that operated the El Faro. They do that as part of a service that's aimed at putting weather data into context and making it more usable and helpful for the customers. The takeaway that I get, though, is that there is no substitute for the raw data, the raw discussion that comes from the National Hurricane Center's webpage, from their online services, from the broadcast notices to mariners that they put out. And in particular, for every tropical system, the Hurricane Center maintains what they call a discussion page, and it's continually updated. And all of us who live along the coasts of Florida, I've worked as a commercial mariner in a previous career, all of us who are concerned with tropical weather systems know to not just look at the maps, not just look at the track forecast, but to read the text of the discussion page. It's like you're looking over the shoulder of the meteorologist at the Hurricane Center in Miami,
Right.
and kind of you see and listen to their thought processes, and there's no substitute for that information. And indeed, that was one of the recommendations of the NTSB as part of their investigation. Private party weather services, good, but we have the best of the best in Miami at the National Hurricane Center.
Glen Jackson, I want to ask you as well what it meant to, first of all, read those transcripts and also to hear that captain's audio. How important was that to you, your own discovery about what your brother experienced?
Well, he had the 8 to midnight watch, and you could hear his discussion with the, I believe it was the second mate. They were aware that, excuse me, that they were going into a difficult situation, and just like my brother, of course, he recalls, the ancient mariners. What did they do? How did they explain, if anyone survived, what it must have been like before we understood the meteorological implications of a hurricane? Like Spanish galleons sailing the same waters hundreds of years ago. He was extremely experienced, but I'm sure he in fact had sailed in Alaska on that very ship when it was called the Northern Lights. So he had been in severe weather before, but nothing like they encountered. And to have foreknowledge that you're in close proximity to a hurricane, it must have been extremely difficult to come to some. There's nothing you can do about it. You're doing your job, but you're going into close proximity to a violent storm, and there's nothing you can do about it. And to realize, having read transcripts, just how I won't say calm and collected, but just dedicated to their specific tasks and carry on as best you can.
Yeah, it was amazing, just the composure and how incredibly focused everybody was, despite what they were in. Even at moments when the ship is being just rocked by waves and wind, and clearly, cargo starting to come loose and all of that, how really focused everybody remains. Am I right in thinking, Glenn, that your brother had also been on board a ship during Hurricane Hugo?
He had, yes, I believe that is correct, because he was involved in the um, Desert Storm buildup and also the recovery, the returning of equipment. And I know for sure he had told me an experience where an M1A1 Abrams tank broke loose from its lashings while they're on board, and they were in serious possibility of capsizing, and it was something that indelibly marked him and something he didn't want to have to repeat. In fact, I believe the watchstander actually injured his arm because of the severity of the shifting balance of the cargo, and he had proximity to it. I don't know how close they were as opposed to Hurricane Joaquin, but it was something he was slightly familiar with.
Yeah. One of the things that you have spoken about in the past was this regulatory labyrinth that sort of is required to change any law, the difficulty in changing maritime law, Glenn, and some of the things that failed on the El Faro or perhaps cost lives on the El Faro were basically issues that had surfaced as far back as 1986 with the sinking of the Marine Electric ship, which recommended many of the same things that the El Faro investigation recommended, like enclosed lifeboats. Um, can you have you gotten any more confidence in terms of how a disaster like this can impact the regulatory cycle, can persuade lawmakers to make actual lasting change?
Well, let me preface that, Mark. I knew some active duty Coast Guard Marine inspectors prior to the hurricane, to the loss of the El Faro. And they had told me, their job had been severely dialed back because legislation was passed, ship inspection was going to be done in a self-reporting manner. And the Coast Guard inspectors I knew were rather dismayed, but you do, what you're told, you follow your orders. So as in with any industry, when the regulations are being influenced, written, or modified by the industry being affected, some things may not take precedence. And of course, it's always, as the man mentioned, it's a cost-benefit ratio and analysis. In fact, some of the recommendations that came out of the El Faro disaster have yet to be implemented. So, and looking now, what seafarers have to face, if you read in recent history, now that they're transporting electric vehicles, we've had 3 car carriers that are complete losses because where they're trying to deal now with the new technology of electric cars. 3 ships have been lost, fortunately, with no, as far as I understand, no loss of life, but 3 ships have been lost completely, abandoned and scuttled due to what they believe were fires created from storage of electric vehicles. So again, regulatory framework comes out of disasters. Whether or not those frameworks are implemented in a timely manner, that remains to be seen.
Rochelle, there's a new podcast that has been put together by Maeve McGorn, and she's a former NPR senior editor. It's called Shipwreck. And she says in that it's often said that maritime safety regulations are written in blood, that's the idea that nothing changes until there is a tragedy of such proportions that someone's hand is forced. But she has found that many of the recommendations that came out of this NTSB and Coast Guard investigation, urging things be changed, new policies be implemented, that in many cases those have not become law, that those have sometimes they're recommended and new ships are built with those requirements, but many ships, just like the El Faro, which had been on the ocean for 40 years, had their safety features such as they were grandfathered in. What is your feeling about how, whether the needle has moved enough to have made a difference in the lives of these 33 that were lost in the El Faro, whether it would have made enough difference to save their lives?
I wish that something was in place, because then we would have our loved ones here today and not meeting like this. Unfortunately, more needs to be done. And I said I need to, to get back at it, because it's such a tragic, tragic loss. It's such a tragic, tragic loss. Um, my fear is that they say one thing and do something else. and it all boils down to no one really wants to do what it takes to make it right.
What do you want people here in Jacksonville to be thinking about this week? We mentioned that there was a memorial on Saturday in Maine because many of the people on that ship were from Maine. No doubt there'll be one in Poland because there were a number of Polish engineers on that ship who also went down with it. And then here in Jacksonville, there's a memorial planned tomorrow at the Seafarers Union, another one planned on the day of the accident itself at the site of the permanent memorial here on the river. What do you want people to be thinking about, and what are you going to be thinking about this week during some of those remembrances?
I want everyone to think about us, the crew, how hard that they worked, how they came together as a family to do what it needed to be done to try to let things stay on course. Um, it's I try every year to be strong. I rehearse it. I try to be strong, but it never works because it's just so tragic and it's so painful. What I want people here to know is um, we're still hurting. We've healed, but we're still hurting, and we became a family. And it does our hearts good to know that people are hurting with us, and our story hasn't been forgotten.
Well, I appreciate you all sharing your story. Alan Bliss is going to be speaking about this tomorrow at 5:30 at Old St. Andrew's Church as part of the Historical Society presentation. But Rochelle Hamm, Alan Bliss, Glen Jackson on the phone. Thank you all so much for being here today. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Ann.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, up next, we talk to the founder of the annual Public Forum on Breast Health about 25 years of providing free education to medically underserved communities. Welcome back. Well, my next guest has spent her entire professional career working to educate her patients and the public about breast health and breast cancers. Here to tell us about her upcoming free forum is Dr. Shahla Masood, pathologist and cryptopathologist at UF Health Jacksonville and medical director for the UF Health Breast Center. Good morning, Dr. Masood. Thank you for being here.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
So you, as we mentioned, have really spent decades now, nearly 3 decades, doing this
Almost,
work.
yes.
And it has been a period of, advancement, great advancement in some cases when it comes to breast health and breast cancer. Can you tell us about what has changed in the time that you've been doing the work that you do?
Well, fundamentally, when you really look at breast cancer, this is a disease that has captured the attention of the whole world and is a major global breast health issue. As the result of that, there has been significant changes that has occurred in the diagnosis as well as treatment of breast cancer. So the concept that it used to be that breast cancer is a fatal disease, and if you get it, you're just done, is really has gone because of the fact that we have recognized that, first of all, breast cancer is not a single disease. Breast cancer is a disease that has multiple forms and shapes, and they are biologically very different from each other. So at the time that we thought that breast cancer is a single disease, is gone. It has, multiple different breast cancer type that ranges from a very low grade cancer that if it is detected early, it is managed beautifully and the patient has a long life with no problem. There are a small percentage of breast cancers that they are associated with aggressive behavior. And these are the cases that we also can identify. And therefore, we make sure that they get the most advanced aggressive type of therapy that is available to them.
Are outcomes overall better when it comes to breast cancers? I mean, I know there's this category of early detected cancers, and those are probably easier to resolve or at least keep in remission. But do we have a sense overall as to whether it's become more survivable?
Absolutely. Breast cancer at the moment is a disease that, if detected early and is not aggressive, is practically looked at as a chronic disease. So, in that setting, there are right now millions of women that they're living with so-called breast cancer, and we call it survivors. And the number of survivors all over the world has increased significantly because of the early detection and better therapy that is now available to them.
This forum that you put on really is aimed at the general public, and it's a very nice event. There's a dinner served. It's a free event. You have to register, but it is a free event, and you have a range of disciplines that are represented there, including things like obviously radiation oncology, but also psychiatry. What are you aiming to present to people in terms of the various kind of medical expertise the experts that you bring in?
That's an excellent question because of the fact that, again, we have learned that as breast cancer is not a single disease that can be taken care by a single physician, there is multidisciplinary effort of a group of physicians in different disciplines that they need to take care of a patient with breast cancer. That includes pathologists, radiologists, surgeons, radiation oncologists, plastic surgeons, as well as the psychiatrists. And those people that also they are involved in risk assessment, so to speak, to try to define what kind of risk a woman has and what are the follow-up recommendation that can occur for patients that they are so-called at high risk. Therefore, the concept of breast center and breast programs have been coming on board for a long time right now, and there is a entity that we are calling it National Accreditation Program for Breast Centers, that they oversee that overall functions of different physicians that collectively put their mind to try to plan therapy for individual patients based on the character of the tumor of that individual patient.
It is a really great advancement in the way that we approach and treat cancers. The session is called What Everyone Should Know About Breast Health. As we said, seating is limited, but registration begins on site Thursday, October 2nd at 5:30. It's at the Marriott Jacksonville downtown, and you can find a link to it on our website. Dr. Shahla Masood, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
All right. Up next, how the Jags defense won the day in their Sunday matchup against San Francisco.
Terrell Hogan Law.
I'm Wayne Hogan. When people are hurt through no fault of their own, finding the who, what, when, where, why, and how that led to the accident is critical to proving the truth.
More at terrellhoganlaw.com. World Affairs Council and the River Club, partnering to explore today's complex and interconnected business world. October 14th, People on the Move, Science, Policy, and Politics of Immigration. More information at worldaffairscounciljacks.org.
Hi, this is Jesse Cook, and I'm excited to be returning to Jacksonville on January 23rd, 2026 at the WJCT Soundstage. Join me for an unforgettable night of music, rhythm, and connection.
Go to wjct.org/events.
Princeton University President Chris Eisgruber says higher education is being tested.
We have to be steadfast in our commitments to free speech, academic freedom, civility. You can't succeed as a university if you start giving up on those principles.
We'll talk with Eisgruber about free speech, anti-Semitism, academic freedom, and the historic numbers of Americans who say college isn't even worth it anymore. That's on the next On Point.
Today at 11, here on WJCT News 89.9.
Who the Justice Department chooses to prosecute and who it doesn't looks a lot like a reflection of President Trump's foes versus friends. The White House says that's not the case.
It is not weaponizing the Department of Justice to demand accountability for those who weaponized the Department of Justice.
Political interference at the DOJ, next time on 1A.
Today, starting at 10 on WJCT News 89.9.
Welcome back. Well, the Jaguars forced the 49ers to their first loss of the season and moved Jacksonville to 3-1. Here to celebrate Victory Monday is Alessandra Pomprian, sportscaster with News for Jax. Good morning, Alessandra.
Good morning. We get to celebrate 2 Victory Mondays back to back.
Yeah.
This is huge.
When was the last time this happened?
A long time ago. Long time ago.
I mean,
probably 2 years ago.
A strong start to the season. It has been.
Yeah, and I'm not too surprised just because when you get a new head coach, opposing teams, they don't know exactly, what the new team's going to look like. And usually you get, some win. I mean, obviously this was a very good win, but usually you get some wins just because everyone's amped up, they're optimistic. Obviously the culture is building really well in the Miller Electric Center. But I'm not too surprised. And they were banged up. The 49ers were banged up. And this was a sloppy win again for the Jaguars. But, a win is a win, so who cares?
Yeah, and it sounds like, Coach was saying that. He's like, it wasn't pretty, but he's still really glad with what they're doing. And it was another game defensively where they looked really strong.
Yeah, the Jaguars defense lights out. Leading the league again with 13 takeaways in 4 games is just, that's just remarkable. It's insane to think about that, especially because they're not playing against, easy teams. They just played the 49ers. They played the Texans. They played the Bengals. Those are 3 really good offenses and really good teams. And to be able to produce 4 or 13 takeaways in 4 games is just, it's hats off to the defense.
This was a 26-21 win for the Jaguars. It sounds closer maybe than it felt. So did you have any of that, it's going to happen in the fourth quarter fear like we've had for the last couple games? Or did you think that they sort of had it locked?
This is the second game where that third quarter, the offense kind of goes in a slump and the opposing team is able to fight back a little bit. And you saw that again this year or this game. But then Parker Washington returned that punt for a touchdown. I think that really kind of energized the team. And that's when I was like, okay, they should be able to get it together in the fourth quarter, which of course they did. And Brock Purdy did score that touchdown, but after that, I thought the Jaguars were definitely going to be able to hold it. And of course they did. And then Eric Armstead coming up big, sacking Brock Purdy, fumbling the ball. Then Foye Lukin recovered it. That's when I knew, of course, that, this game was over. And it's kind of poetic because Eric Armstead was there for a decade, I believe. He was in San Francisco until he was traded here. And so to be able to, get the win for your team against your former team in that type of fashion, I think is, it's really poetic.
Poetic justice, right? And so they've got a big Monday night football game here at home. A lot of attention, obviously, attends those games. So what are you going to be looking for? The Chiefs are 2-2 right now.
Yeah, but the Chiefs are the Chiefs. So I feel like, Jaguars may have a better record, but the Chiefs are the Chiefs, and when the lights turn on, it's Monday Night Football. Everyone will be watching this game. It's here, which is nice because Jacksonville gets to experience Monday Night Football. But you can't count them out just because they're 2-2. But it's nice to have some momentum into that game. And the Chiefs just played, I believe they played the Ravens yesterday, and just wiped them out. That was a big win for the Chiefs. So they're bringing some winning momentum. It's going to be a hard game for the Jaguars, but I think, they played the Chiefs, was it last year, 2 years ago? And you're like, okay, that's definitely going to be a loss. Just check that off. But now they have a chance. They really do. This defense is so good. And, the offense is clicking and Trevor Lawrence is doing a good job managing. So I think the Jaguars have a chance. It's going to be a tough game, though, but it will be so exciting.
Yeah, it'll be a fun one to watch.
Mm-hmm.
I know we bring you on to talk Jaguars, but we would be remiss if we didn't at least mention what's going on with the Jumbo Shrimp, because they are victorious for the first time in, I don't know.
1968 was the last time they won the AAA championship.
Wow.
Isn't that insane? 1960. I don't even know how many years ago that was. But yeah, this is awesome. This is so awesome for the Jumbo Shrimp. You know, they were able to play the International League Championship here Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. They forced the game 3. They won it. Then they're in Las Vegas. They started at 10 p.m. Eastern time. They didn't win until 1:30 a.m. Eastern time on Sunday morning. And it was a walk-off homer in the bottom of the 9th, which is, you know, I mean, just such a way to win the championship. So, yeah, that's awesome for them and good for the AAA affiliate of the Marlins, too.
I'm sure there'll be some local celebrations of that here, but a fun victory for the Shrimp. So, Alessandra, just wrapping up, anybody in particular you're watching next week in the
Monday
Night game? Yeah.
Ooh, Josh Hines Allen.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, he had his way with Brock Purdy against, yesterday against the 49ers. So I'm hoping that he can, turn up the pressure against Patrick Mahomes. If you can get to the quarterback, if you can disrupt him, make his life really difficult for those 4 quarters, obviously the Jaguars offense should have a chance then to capitalize when they have the ball. So I'm hoping that they can do that. But again, I mean, that Chiefs team is always the one that everyone wants to look at and always the one everyone circles. So we'll see. But it's going to be such a good game.
Unpredictable, but fun. Well, Alessandra Pomprian, newscaster at Sports for Jacks. Thanks for being here. Oh,
Yeah,
excuse me,
thanks.
sportscaster at News for Jacks.
Oh, you're good.
We'll get that right. Thanks for being here. Appreciate it. And that's our program. Thank you for listening. If you have comments or questions, you can send either to First Coast Connect at WJCT.org. And if you missed anything, you can catch our rebroadcast tonight at 8 o'clock, or you can find all of our archive on your favorite podcast platform. The executive producer of First Coast Connect is David Luckin. Our show is produced by Stacey Bennett and usually directed by Brady Corum, although we've got Andrew Wickman and Michelle Corum on the boards today. On the technical side, we've got Isabella wow, I'm still going to mess it up. Isabella Casapow is our associate producer. She's new, but not that new, so I shouldn't be messing up her name. Join us tomorrow when we get a legal look at the Trump administration's crackdown on the president's personal enemies and political rivals. I'm Ann Schindler. You've been listening to First Coast Connect on WJCT News 89.9.
Support for First Coast Connect is provided by Baptist Health and the North Florida TPO.
The North Florida TPO is committed to shaping our transportation future. We're focused on planning, funding, clean fuels, and new technologies for a vibrant, connected community. Learn more at northfloridatpo.com. Baptist Health is a proud supporter of First Coast Connect. Baptist Health, committed to building a healthier community for all of us. More info at 202-4YOU or baptistjacks.com. Win